Okay, picture this. You're standing right on the edge of a really big decision. Maybe it's, I don't know, taking that scary new job or launching something that feels way too ambitious. Or even just a big shift in your personal life. Your heart's kind of pounding, maybe your palms get a little sweaty, and you hear that little voice inside asking, am I really ready for this? Can I actually do this?
Yeah.
I know I've felt that way. Starting this show definitely felt like that sometimes. If you've ever been there, where that doubt feels almost physical, you are definitely not alone.
Oh, absolutely. That moment of uncertainty, that sort of internal clash between wanting something and being afraid of it.
Yeah.
That's just profoundly human, isn't it?
It really is. And usually the advice is just, ignore the doubt, push through, fake it till you make it.
Right, Project Confidence.
Yeah. But what if? What if that feeling that, am I ready? Anxiety, that doubt, what if it's not actually something to just shove down? What if, maybe counterintuitively, leaning into those uncomfortable feelings is the real key? The actual path to getting what you truly want.
Well, that's a fascinating idea, and it's pretty central to what we're diving into today. We're looking at insights from a source called Joe Hudson, The Art of Accomplishment, and the Top 1%.
Okay, Joe Hudson. Tell us a bit about him.
Sure. So Joe Hudson is a very well-regarded executive coach. He's worked with leaders at some really big-name places. Think Apple, OpenAI, Google, companies like that.
Wow, okay. Big players.
Yeah. And he's also the person behind the Art of Accomplishment framework and its podcast.
Got it. So someone guiding people, often seen as, well, at the very peak of their fields, which ties into that top 1% part of the title.
Right.
But the source suggests Hudson has a pretty different take on what top 1% actually means.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
According to the material we looked at, Hudson's definition isn't about the usual stuff, wealth, status, job title.
Not the external metrics.
No. It's about internal mastery. It's about really mastering yourself, your emotions, your relationships, all to live a life that's deeply fulfilling, authentic, and genuinely effective. It's about your inner capacity, not just what you accumulate outside.
Okay, that definitely flips the usual script on top 1%. So our goal here in this deep dive is to unpack Hudson's philosophy as it's laid out in these sources, to understand this sort of internal path to accomplishment. And, maybe most importantly, figure out how you, listening right now, might be able to apply some of these ideas to your own life, for those big decisions, those aspirations you have.
Exactly. It's about understanding his framework for building that inner strength, that presence that helps you navigate challenges, including that very real feeling of, am I actually ready for this?
All right, let's get into it. Where does Hudson say this journey starts, this path to his kind of top 1% living?
It starts fundamentally from within. The first pillar is mastering emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence, okay.
According to the source, Hudson sees this as the absolute cornerstone. Why? Because in his view, all decisions are fundamentally emotional decisions.
Wait, hold on. All decisions, even things that feel super logical, like, I don't know, analyzing spreadsheets or choosing an investment.
Yeah, that's a really key point from the source material. Hudson's perspective is that even when you're using logic and data, and those are important tools, obviously the process itself is shaped by emotion.
How so?
Well, think about it. Which data do you choose to focus on? How do you interpret what you see? And what ultimately motivates you to actually act on that analysis? All of that, he argues, is influenced, maybe subtly, maybe not so subtly, by underlying emotions.
Like excitement about a potential win, or maybe fear of losing out.
Exactly. Or even just discomfort with ambiguity or uncertainty. If you ignore that emotional layer, the source suggests you're missing a huge piece of what's actually driving your choices.
Okay, that's a big idea. The emotional current is always there, kind of shaping everything. So how does he suggest we actually, get better at this, cultivate this mastery?
The source breaks it down into a few key parts. First up, cultivate self-awareness.
Right, knowing yourself.
But it's more than just a buzzword. It means really dedicating time and energy to noticing your emotions as they happen and understanding how they affect your thoughts, your reactions, your behavior.
How do you do that practically?
Well, the source mentions things like regular journaling, maybe meditation, or even just quiet reflection. Consistent practice to build that muscle of internal observation. You need to see what's going on inside first.
Makes sense. You have to notice it to understand it. Okay, what's next after awareness?
This is where it gets really interesting and connects right back to that feeling we talked about in the intro, that am I ready moment. The second component is Embrace emotional fluidity.
Emotional fluidity. Okay.
The source explains that Hudson doesn't teach suppressing difficult emotions. Things like fear, anxiety, frustration.
Stuff we usually try to avoid.
Exactly. Instead, he says you should actively welcome them.
Welcome fear. That sounds completely backwards. My instinct is to run from fear.
Right. And that's the core insight here. The source points out that when you resist an emotion, like when you fight that "am I ready" feeling, you're actually creating internal conflict. You're basically fighting yourself.
And wasting energy doing it.
Precisely. By simply acknowledging and accepting the emotion, just saying, okay, wow, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety about this presentation, you lessen that internal battle.
So the act of just accepting it kind of takes the pressure off.
That's the idea. It frees up the energy you were using to push it away. And that freed up energy can then be used for clearer thinking, more focused action, like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. If you just let it float, you stop struggling.
Okay, so welcoming the emotion doesn't mean letting it take over.
Not at all. It means taking away its power over you by removing the struggle against it. And that, the source suggests, is absolutely crucial for navigating those big, potentially scary decisions.
Huh. That's a completely different way to approach those tough feelings. It's less about being fearless, more about being with the fear in a new way.
Exactly. And flowing right out of that acceptance comes the third piece. Practice vulnerability.
Vulnerability, okay.
The source highlights that sharing your emotional experience authentically with others appropriately, of course, is really vital. This kind of openness builds deeper trust, strengthens relationships, which, in Hudson's view, are absolutely foundational to any kind of lasting success.
And does the source give an example of this from his coaching?
Yeah, it mentions how Hudson often works with executives who feel stuck, maybe paralyzed by a big decision.
Yeah, decision paralysis is real.
Totally. And he guides them to actually look at the underlying emotions they might not even be acknowledging. Maybe it's fear of judgment or anxiety about failing or even guilt about how the decision might affect others.
So digging underneath the surface, indecision.
Right. And once they can welcome and understand those feelings, often the path forward just becomes much clearer. The paralysis lifts.
Okay, so pillar one is building the strong, self-aware, emotionally fluid inner world. Got it. Where does Hudson say we should focus next?
So once you have that internal foundation strengthening, you start building outwards. The second major pillar is build authentic connections.
Connections, relationships.
Yeah, and the source really emphasizes that success, especially the kind of holistic success Hudson talks about, it just doesn't happen in a vacuum. It relies heavily on the quality of your relationships.
Not just having a big network, but real connections.
Exactly. We're not talking about just transactional contacts here. These are genuine connections that provide real support, that can open up unexpected opportunities and foster that crucial sense of belonging.
Okay, so how do we cultivate these authentic connections according to the source?
Well, there are a few key principles outlined. First one, be genuine. Show up as your actual self.
Easier said than done sometimes.
For sure. But try to be who you think others want you to be is exhausting, right?
Yeah.
And it only builds shallow connections anyway. The source points out that vulnerability and honesty, which naturally flow from that emotional fluidity we just talked about, are way more effective for building deep trust and loyalty.
That makes sense. If you're busy hiding your own feelings, it's hard to be real with someone else.
Exactly. The second principle is set clear boundaries.
Boundaries. Super important, often difficult.
Definitely. And crucial for healthy relationships. The source notes that communicating your limits, your needs, isn't about being difficult or selfish. It's actually about establishing mutual respect. Constantly people-pleasing just drains your energy and undermines the authenticity of the connection. Learning to say no, gracefully but firmly, is key.
So boundaries actually protect the relationship in the long run.
Yes, for both people involved. And the third principle here is listen deeply.
Going beyond just hearing the words.
Way beyond. It means really focusing your attention on understanding the other person's perspective, their needs, their challenges. The source highlights that when you offer genuine support and empathy, you become a trusted ally. And that naturally leads to stronger collaboration, mutual growth, that kind of thing.
Is there an example in the source for this one?
Yeah, it talks about how Hudson's work demonstrates this in practice. When leaders focus on building these authentic relationships, it can transform the whole team dynamic. Colleagues become real advocates for each other. Mentors become true partners. The group's ability to handle challenges increases massively because there's this underlying trust and understanding. not just, shared tasks or goals.
Okay, so we've got the internal work, the emotional intelligence, then building these strong, authentic external connections. How does Hudson connect this to actually, getting things done, achieving goals?
Right, because it's not just about feeling good and having good relationships. That brings us to the third pillar. Set clear goals and take action. This is where the practical application really comes in. Building on that emotional mastery and those strong connections is where the vision starts becoming reality.
Okay, time to translate the internal work into external results.
Exactly. And the source details a few action-oriented steps within this. First, define your desires.
Know what you want.
And get really specific about it. What do you genuinely want? Career, finances, personal growth, relationships, whatever area it is. The source says Hudson puts huge emphasis on asking, what do I truly want? And learning to separate that from what society tells you or what you feel you should want.
Right, avoiding those external scripts we mentioned earlier. Tuning into your own authentic desires.
Precisely. Second step, act consistently.
Small steps add up.
That's the core idea. It's not necessarily about making massive, earth-shattering leaps every single day, though sometimes those happen. The source connects Hudson's thinking here to that principle of getting maybe 1% better each day, taking small, consistent actions.
Why small steps?
Because those seemingly minor efforts compound over time. They build momentum and turn daunting, huge goals into something that feels much more manageable and achievable. It's the power of persistence.
Makes sense. Keep the ball rolling. What else?
Third, stay flexible. The source notes that Hudson teaches that the path to achieving anything meaningful is rarely, if ever, a straight line.
Things change, obstacles pop up.
Exactly. So you need to be willing to pivot, to adapt your approach, maybe even change direction when circumstances shift or when you learn something new along the way. Being too rigid, just sticking blindly to the original plan when the world around you has changed, that can lead to stagnation. Adaptability is key, and it's informed by that self-awareness and deep listening we talked about.
And the source gives an example of this flexibility.
Yeah, it describes a leader, say, setting a goal to improve team morale. Their initial action might be setting up weekly check-ins.
Okay, a concrete step.
Right. But then, maybe the feedback shows those check-ins aren't really hitting the mark, or perhaps new challenges emerge within the team. A flexible leader adjusts. Maybe they try different communication methods. Maybe they need to address specific conflicts that have surfaced, all while staying emotionally tuned in to the team's needs and their own responses.
So it's a cycle. Act, get feedback, adjust, act again, all grounded in that internal awareness and connection.
You got it.
Okay, so internal mastery, building connections, taking consistent but flexible action. Is that the whole picture, or is there more?
There's one more crucial element, which emphasizes that this whole thing isn't a one-and-done deal. It's not like you reach some endpoint and you're finished. The fourth pillar is commit to continuous learning and growth.
Always evolving.
Exactly. The source really highlights that the people who truly embody this top 1% idea in Hudson's sense are perpetual learners. They're constantly evolving based on their experiences.
So what does that look like in practice? What kind of habits?
The source points to a few things. First, stay curious. Actively look for new knowledge, new skills, different perspectives. Don't assume you know it all.
Keep an open mind.
Right. The source even mentions Hudson's own career path, moving from venture capital to executive coaching as an example of someone embracing diverse experiences and being willing to learn and grow in completely new areas.
Wow, yeah, that kind of major shift definitely requires adaptability and a willingness to be a beginner again.
Totally. Second habit, learn from failure. This is huge.
Ugh, the F word.
Yeah, but Hudson reframes it. View setbacks not as evidence of personal flaws or as reasons to just give up. Instead, see them as incredibly valuable feedback.
Data points, basically.
Exactly. Mistakes become necessary stepping stones. The question shifts from, why did I mess up, to, okay, what can I learn from this, and how does this inform what I do next?
Extracting the lesson, not just dwelling on the mistake.
Right. And third, integrate feedback. This means constantly evaluating your progress, looking at the results you're getting, and being willing to tweak your approach based on what you learn, whether that feedback comes from external sources like colleagues or results, or from your own internal reflections.
Listening to what the world and your own experience are telling you.
Precisely. And the source specifically mentions Hudson helping people work on dismantling limiting beliefs. You know, those internal stories we tell ourselves like, I'm not smart enough, or I can't handle this, especially the ones that pop up during moments of doubt or after a setback.
The self-sabotage stuff.
Yeah. and consciously replacing those with more empowering, realistic beliefs based on evidence and learning.
So that loop of learning and feedback ties right back into the emotional intelligence and self-awareness work we started with.
It absolutely does. It's all interconnected, this continuous cycle: learn, try, maybe fail productively, integrate the feedback, adjust, try again. That's how you keep refining your path and growing.
Okay, so if someone is diligently cultivating this inner world, building these deep connections, taking action, constantly learning, what does Hudson say the end result looks like? What is this holistic success he talks about?
Right, so for Hudson, the outcome isn't just, say, hitting a career milestone. It's achieving holistic success. Being in his version of the top 1% means excelling across multiple dimensions of your life, simultaneously, professionally, personally, and emotionally. It's an integrated picture.
Holistic, so you can't just crush it at work while everything else falls apart.
That's exactly the point. The source outlines the key components of this holistic view. First, balance. Success in one area shouldn't constantly sacrifice other important areas. Hudson really stresses finding harmony between work, relationships, physical health, emotional well-being. True success in this framework isn't being a star performer if your family life or your health is suffering deeply because of it.
Which definitely requires those boundaries and genuine connections we talked about earlier to maintain.
Absolutely. They enable that balance. Second component, authenticity.
Being true to yourself.
Yes, living in alignment with your actual values, not just bending to external pressures or following those societal scripts about what success is supposed to look like. The source reinforces that Hudson's framework is really about shedding those external definitions so you can define and pursue success entirely on your own terms.
That sounds incredibly liberating. Probably challenging too, but freeing.
It definitely takes courage, yeah. And the third component of holistic success is joy in the journey.
Finding enjoyment along the way.
Yes, and the source highlights something interesting here. Hudson apparently sees enjoyment not just as the reward you get after you achieve something, but as a powerful tool and an important signal during the process.
A tool? How so?
Finding genuine presence, satisfaction, even fun in what you're doing actually accelerates achievement, according to this view. It makes the whole effort sustainable because you're not just grinding towards some distant payoff. You're finding value in the process itself.
So joy isn't just a nice to have, it actually fuels the success.
That seems to be the argument. The source mentions observations from Hudson's work, suggesting that leaders who prioritize finding joy and authenticity in their work often end up outperforming those driven purely by external ambition or fear.
That's a pretty compelling case for trying to enjoy the ride.
It really is. So if you synthesize it all, as the source seems to do, you see this integrated system, right? Mastering your emotions helps you build more authentic connections. Those connections provide support and perspective for taking effective action toward goals that you genuinely desire. The results of that action give you feedback for continuous learning. And you're doing all of this while consciously aiming for a life that feels balanced, authentic, and yes, even joyful, defined by you. Each part really does reinforce the others.
Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive into Joe Hudson's philosophy. Based on what we've discussed from the sources, what are the main takeaways listeners should hold on to?
I think at its core, Hudson's vision of the top 1% is really about shifting focus from external accumulation to internal mastery. It's about cultivating deep emotional intelligence, really understanding and working with your feelings, not against them.
Especially those feelings of doubt.
Especially those, yes. Then using that foundation to build genuinely supportive relationships. Setting clear goals that come from your authentic desires and taking consistent but also adaptable action towards them.
And always learning.
Always learning, yeah. Committing to continuous growth, embracing feedback, even reframing failure as learning, and ultimately defining and pursuing success in a holistic way, seeking that balance, authenticity, and even joy across all the important areas of your life.
So it's really less about climbing some predefined ladder and more about building this rich, resilient, fulfilling inner world, which then naturally shapes your outer experience for the better.
Well put. It's about living a life that feels deeply connected, emotionally intelligent, and always evolving, especially when you hit those inevitable moments of doubt.
Exactly. It reframes the whole idea of accomplishment. It's more about mastering yourself and the process, not just ticking off external boxes. So thinking back to that moment we started with, standing on the edge of something big, feeling that wave of doubt, that am I really ready voice. If true accomplishment in this Hudson framework involves shedding those external pressures and fully embracing your entire emotional range, including that doubt, that anxiety, What limiting belief, maybe about yourself, or maybe about what success even is? What external expectation are you ready to challenge? Maybe that's the very next step in your own unique journey, just something to reflect on.